Know that we're living through challenging times, indeed troubling times, and at the same time, there are some really good efforts going on to address and reduce homelessness in the Bay Area. And today we're going to be focused on the issue of inflow. Um, Shortly, we will have a panel discussion, and I want to welcome Hugo Ramirez, um, Daniel Casanova, Luke Barnesmore, and Lizette Martinez will be participating in that panel facilitated by Susanna Parsons. After that, we'll have time for a Q&A, and then we are going to have a discussion about some of the legislation and policy advocacy we want to advance both at the state and the federal level in the near term. But first, we're going to kick things off with a new data spotlight that All Home has put together, and it is focused on an aspect of homelessness that oftentimes goes overlooked, particularly in the media and in political discussions, and that's the issue of inflow. Um, I think pretty much probably everyone in this meeting knows that uh, homelessness is not something that you can just fix and it goes away. That there are always people at risk of becoming unhoused in the region. Um, our existing data, like the pit count, provides a snapshot of homelessness, but the reality is much more dynamic. Thousands of people each year move out of homelessness and into stable homelessness, move into stable housing, but the continued inflow is what creates a lot of the problem. And a failure to address that inflow over time has gotten the Bay Area to where it is today in many respects. Um, but there are now significant efforts happening in the region to address this. We need to reduce entries to homelessness at the same time we're building housing and scaling services. If we don't do this, we can't make sustained progress. So, to get us started, David Amaral, our director of research at All Home, will lay out the data that he has put together to talk about inflow into homelessness in the Bay Area. David?
Good morning, everyone. Great to be with you today. Marquez, if you want to just... Okay, yeah, great. So as Ken suggested, my role here today is largely to ground our conversation in some evidence that conveys just how imperative it is that we devote more attention and resources to interventions that help people before they become homeless. So last week, we at All Home published our first data spotlight. And we see this series as an opportunity to use data to call attention to overlooked challenges and to make a case for effective and research-based solutions. And in this first spotlight, we've focused on new entries into homelessness. We analyzed data from the Homeless Data Integration System, or HDIS, a state data source. And we were trying to answer a few questions. The first was how many people are becoming homeless for the first time every year. We looked at data for the state, for the Bay Area region, and for all 9 counties within it. We also wanted to know what share of all people who are accessing homelessness services are represented, or does this group represent, are experiencing homelessness for the first time, as the state defines it. And then what are the racial and ethnic disparities, specifically in first-time homelessness? I think many of us are aware that there are stark disparities in the population of people currently experiencing it, but we wanted to distinguish this and look at, for people becoming homeless, newly homeless in a year, what racial and ethnic disparities exist. And these questions were motivated by our sense that, as Ken said, both policymakers and the general public generally fail to fully grasp the dynamic nature of homelessness. And by paying insufficient attention to just how many people are moving out of homelessness and into homelessness in a given year, we think we're likely failing to pay enough attention to and invest in the full spectrum of needed solutions. Next slide, Marquez. So here's what we found. The most recent data available indicate that over 35,000 people are becoming homeless for the first time in the Bay Area over the course of the year. Close to a quarter of whom, it's worth mentioning, are adults over the age of 50. And while there are a number of limitations to the data, which we call attention to in the spotlight, and which I encourage you to read, this provides a really useful proxy for just how many people are newly entering homelessness in a year. And we also found that nearly half of all people accessing homelessness assistance programs in the region were characterized as experiencing homelessness for the first time. Another 29% were returning to homelessness after a prior exit to housing. Next slide.
Santa
We
Clara.
also found stark racial disparities, racial and ethnic disparities in who is experiencing homelessness for the first time. And we tried to present the data for this in two ways. In the bar chart we show here, the gray bars show each group's share of the general population. This is for the Bay Area region, but in the spotlight, you can look also at the state level and for each of the counties in the Bay Area. So the gray bars show each group's share of the general population. The green bars show each group's share of people becoming newly homeless. And then on the right, we calculate for each group, the rate of first-time homelessness per 10,000 residents. So using sort of a public health framing. And you can see that particularly Black and Indigenous residents in the region are substantially overrepresented among those being pushed into homelessness for the first time. So for example, while the rate of first-time homelessness is 46 per 10,000 Bay Area residents, Black residents in the region are over 4 times more likely to become homeless for the first time, with a rate of 197 per 10,000 residents. So the scale of inflow into homelessness is substantial and unequal, and we think deserves a lot of attention. Next slide. So there are two last points that I want to make that I think will help set up our conversation today. The first is that not everyone is equally at risk of becoming homeless. And we have an increasingly better sense and understanding of the factors that make people particularly vulnerable to becoming homeless. And among those risk factors that inform some of the programs we'll be discussing in a minute are housing factors, like a prior experience in homelessness or living either without a lease or with a pending eviction filing. Household factors, where the head of the household is either a young or older adult, and those who have recently experienced a life change, like a birth or a death or a divorce. And then there are other risk factors, including involvement with the justice system or having a chronic health condition. And these risk factors can help us design programs and inform prioritization tools and direct assistance to those households and populations for whom the risks are the highest. Next slide. The other point I wanted to make is that prevention programs occur along a continuum, and that there is a relatively wide and diverse collection of programs that either implicitly or explicitly are aimed at keeping people stably housed and keeping them from engaging with the homelessness response system. And this graphic lays out some of the programs alongside the risks of experiencing homelessness for the households they serve. Next slide. And today, we're focusing primarily on the programs serving households and populations that are known to be at relatively high risk of becoming homeless. These programs may provide housing or income supports, eviction prevention or tenant legal services, or targeted homelessness prevention through flexible financial support or housing-focused services. So at this point, I'll pass it to Susanna Parsons for a conversation with some of our partners running programs that do just some of these things.
Thank you, David. Thanks for getting us started, laying out the scale of this challenge, what we know about who is most at risk of being pushed into homelessness, and setting us up for this discussion. I encourage folks to drop questions or comments, reactions in the chat as we go. My name is Susanna Parsons. I'm All Homes Director of Policy and Legislation. I'm thrilled to be moderating this conversation this morning, getting into our panel discussion where we'll hear about a range of programs addressing this challenge across the region. I'll start by introducing our panelists, but before I do that, just a quick note that we'll invite our panelists to speak about the work that they're doing. We'll have some discussion, and then we'll open it up to you all for your questions, to hear from you about programs that work in your communities that you want to elevate. So expect that by the end of our conversation today. Let me get us started by introducing the fantastic group of folks that we have here today. First, Hugo Ramirez, the Deputy Director of Housing for the City of Oakland. Hugo previously served almost 10 years at the City and County of San Francisco in the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, where he oversaw one of the most extensive programs of community-based anti-displacement strategies in the US, including a right to counsel program, tenant-landlord mediation, and tenant outreach and education services. Thanks for being here, Hugo. We also have Daniel Casanova, the Executive Director of the Eviction Defense Collaborative in San Francisco. EDC has been a leader in innovative direct service responses to the housing crisis, one of the first organizations in the nation to combine rental assistance, legal assistance in an eviction, and advocacy for shelter clients all under one roof. And Daniel comes to this work with over 2 decades of building and leading nonprofits, including in economic development work in East, North, and West Africa and elsewhere. Great to have you here. We also have Luke Barnesmore, Director of Strategy at Front Porch Community Services, where he leads public affairs, policy, research, marketing, communications, and growth outreach strategies for the Home Match program, which we'll hear more about today. Luke brings a wealth of experience from previous roles managing the Home Match Marin program and serving as a case manager at Larkin Street Youth Services. And then finally, Lizette Martinez, Initiatives Officer at Destination Home. Lizette is a Bay Area native and a daughter of immigrants. Prior to joining Destination Home, Lizette worked on food justice issues, where she developed and managed initiatives to support farmers with economic opportunity and provide families with nourishing local food. Thrilled to have the 4 of you here today. Thank you for diving into this conversation this morning. I'm gonna get things started by inviting Hugo to kick us off.
Sorry about that. Was trying to mute myself. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here. I'm actually the Deputy Director for Community Development at Oakland HCD. So my division includes Oakland's rent control jurisdiction, or rent control agency, I should say, called the Rent Adjustment Program, or RAP. And then the other unit in my division is the unit that administers our federal formula grants, the CDBG suite of federal formula grants, and our anti-displacement services. So, you know, the City of Oakland's HCD is really focused on the 3 Ps of production of new affordable housing, the preservation of existing so-called naturally occurring housing, and the protection of Oaklanders from displacement, which is really my division's focus. The other 2 Ps are our other deputy director. She oversees those housing activities of production and preservation. So let me quickly ground us in some data. Next slide, please, Susanna, or whomever. And I think David did an amazing job really describing inflow in our region and the disparities in inflow. So let's move on to the next slide, which is that in Oakland, Oakland's Black population decreased from 1990 to 2023 from 43% to 21%. So this is an outmigration of almost 68,000 Black Oaklanders. So just to give you an idea as to scale, 68,000 represents about 75% of Oakland's current Black population. Next slide, please. And as you can see here, this is our most recent point in time count in Oakland. You can see extreme overrepresentation of Black Oaklanders in homelessness. So for example, Latinx Oaklanders are roughly 26 well, roughly 27% of the overall population and represent less than 20% of the unhoused population in Oakland. Or on the far right, you can see that white Oaklanders are almost a third of the overall population, but represent less than a fifth of the unhoused population. Now, that tallest bar right there, Black Oaklanders represent less than 22% of the overall city population, but almost 53% of our unhoused population. So we have an imperative to really focus our efforts, focus our extremely limited resources precisely where the inequities are greatest so that we can reduce those inequities and thereby have the maximum equity impact. So before we move on to the next slide, let me just share a little bit about our program. And I'm sorry, I'm monitoring a city council budget meeting as I'm presenting. Hopefully no big fires to put out. So with that, the City of Oakland co-designed with the Bay Area Community Services, or BACS, All Home, and others, including the City and County of San Francisco when I was there, and key stakeholders there, a targeted homelessness prevention program with the following features. Prioritization based on local data and evidence-based research that, oh, I love those visuals, David, in your slide deck. Very clear. So these factors are shown to be most predictive of homelessness, such as first and foremost, past homelessness, past incarceration and other system involvement, extremely low income, zip codes with the highest concentration of housing precarity, et cetera. It's a long list, but so it's that prioritization that's based on data, based on evidence. Secondly, and it's more of a technical thing, is that this prioritization is embedded in the actual and very simple application for help. And in addition to having a simple application for help, the post-application process is as low barrier as possible. It's primarily a rental assistance program. And as folks on this call know, interfacing with a landlord, trying to understand what the unpaid rent is, it's a very time intensive, very staff intensive process. And the last thing the program want to do is create more barriers for these super vulnerable households who are receiving this help. So the prioritization, the fact that the prioritization is embedded, and this platform is actually financed by All Home, and it's operated by BACS across many communities in the region and growing. Hopefully, it'll grow further. Another important kind of feature is that there is no sustainability requirement. Old school rental assistance programs, old school is outdated, I should say, not evidence-based. They require that a household be able to sustain their rent moving forward. And so you're essentially cherry picking those applicants that perhaps don't need the most help. If they did, I suppose the sustainability requirement, you're really only serving those who just need that help that one time and not anymore. They'll land back on their feet, and you're therefore not serving the most vulnerable, those who need it most, those who could most benefit from this help. And then intervention, right? So I really want to distinguish between an intervention and the targeting, right? So we know what works. Flexible financial assistance of all types. It could be, one time, ongoing, shallow, deep, universal basic income, money, right? It's money in its many forms. It's all effective. Evidence shows that. Legal services, it can be eviction defense, which is what Daniel's organization does. It could be benefits advocacy. Legal services of all types is also effective at stabilizing housing for our most vulnerable residents. There's home sharing, there's mediation. Again, those are all very effective interventions. But targeted homelessness prevention is, yes, a function of that intervention that is effective, but it also must be a function of the targeting, that those who are receiving the help are those who are most likely to experience homelessness. So that's our program in a nutshell. I shared with you the extreme disparities, inequities in Oakland in terms of homelessness, in terms of housing precarity. And so, we can demonstrate through our program that the clientele that's being served by our targeted homelessness prevention program reflects really the same demographics of our unhoused population, of our neighborhoods who are most impacted by displacement pressures, right? So 76% of program participants are Black, 74% of those who experienced incarceration are Black, 41% of program participants had past homelessness experience, 58% of program participants paid 70% or more on rent, and then 26% of program participants were not the leaseholders. We know, again, from the research, from the evidence, the statewide study, for example, found that almost half of folks who entered homelessness entered it from non-leaseholding situations, right? So friends, loved ones
Go.
are housing them. They're
Hugo, I'm sorry to
yes,
interrupt,
yeah.
but we're still looking at your point in time slide. Did you want us to advance, or are we in the
Oh,
middle?
yes, I actually didn't have many slides. It was mostly just for the data, but yeah, one more slide
Maybe
and
one
we
more?
can
Okay.
close this out. Yeah, where in terms of the targeting, right? So it's not just the household composition and the demographic characteristics of the household, it's also these neighborhoods, right? And in Oakland, the flatlands of East and West Oakland, historically and contemporaneously, are most impacted by, you name it, any indicator of housing instability or educational attainment or economic opportunity, right? So as you can see here, in partnership with Stanford, we identified on the left those areas that are most experiencing displacement pressures. And on the right, it's our targeted homelessness prevention program and the neighborhoods that are being served by it. And as you can see, the targeting is also effective there. And so it's not just the program design, it's not just the platform that All Home funds and help develop, but it's also partnerships with deeply rooted community-based organizations in these neighborhoods that can help find those folks who need the help them with the application process. And so it's kind of, no wrong door, really focused outreach. So I'll just conclude by saying that if a prevention program can't tell you to what extent they're serving folks who've experienced homelessness, incarceration, foster care, what their rent burden is, whether their clientele reflects the races, income levels, and zip codes of those in the community who experience the highest housing precarity, especially homelessness, then those programs likely are not preventing homelessness. That's not to discount them. They likely are very effective at keeping low-income folks in their homes. But whether those folks are those who are most likely to experience homelessness, or perhaps they would lose their housing without assistance, but would they actually enter homelessness, right? So that's all I'll say. We have amazing other panelists, and I'm happy to participate in the Q&A unless I have to put out a little fire at the City Council. So thanks again.
Thank you, Hugo. Thanks for laying out that highly targeted intervention with flexible financial assistance. We're going to go next to Daniel Casanova. There you are. Welcome, Daniel. I know we have one slide for Daniel, so I think we'll broadcast that and give you the mic.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm simple. Yeah, okay. Thank you. So yeah, so I want to be brief. I want to apologize that like the universe speaks through me when I come to things like this. So I'm not the average expert in this, so I have all sorts of tangents that I can think about. But in terms of the focus thing about who I am and what EDC does, you know, for people that don't know the history, in 2018, Prop F passed in San Francisco and gave every tenant facing eviction a right to counsel. We're the lead organization that runs that. There are 11 other LSOs that are in that network that we all coordinate tenant right to counsel with. I think that Hugo did a really beautiful job about talking about the systems and the numbers in this. I think that I'll speak more generally, that one of the things that I'm new to EDC, I've been here about a year and a half. And one of the things that attracted to me to this work is that I think San Francisco has an opportunity to demonstrate, because of its geographic size, because of its government structure, to demonstrate for other cities in the country how you do really staunch, clear prevention. And eviction defense is one big piece of that, but the other pieces are what Hugo was speaking to. It's the rental assistance and subsidies. EDC has a long history of this. And so I think this is where we're relevant in this conversation, is that EDC has been doing rental assistance in the system since before ERAP. And then once SFERAP came on to play, we became one of the primary providers. And why it's important here is that the success that we have, so I have this slide, my one slide, the 92% of tenants who receive representation through tenant right to counsel avoid homelessness. This is done in partnership with that. We wouldn't have that success without tools like subsidies and rental assistance. And so when someone gets a UD or unlawful detainer, we're able to help pay back rent, to settle with landlords, and that contributes to that success. So the ecosystem of both really are needed for there to be this type of intervention and for it to be that successful. And so I think there's this moment right now, even with looming federal and state issues, for us to continue this model and demonstrate how a city can keep people housed. And so that's its simplest form. And so that's EDC. When I was asked about this panel, because I want to give, I feel like there's all the people, I see the people on this call and you all know all of this stuff. So I wanted to give you all more of my like bad ideas. I was like, what are we really talking about here? And I really like Thomas Piketty. And I was like, what would Thomas Piketty be saying if he was on this call with you all? And he'd say, you know, homelessness is not a technical failure. It's a policy choice rooted in inequality. And so I think that going in this general space, like wealth inequality fuels housing inequality, and the skyrocketing values of urban land held disproportionately by the wealthy. This is turned into the housing speculative asset, and it's not a public good. And you know, legal aid fights symptoms, but not root causes. And it's necessary, but I think that, like Hugo's saying, the smarter we get about these upstream initiatives, the less is needed here. They're like some of the EDC founders, you know, talk about this math equation about like how many attorneys are needed in the system to deal with all the UDs that are coming out. And it's like this math formula. It's like, you know, the program was built to handle, and Hugo can correct me because he's like our daddy. So he'd be he could speak to this better than I can, but roughly it was about like 2,800 to 3,000 UDs a year. In this current climate right now, we're on target to go over more than 4,000. And there's not enough attorneys to give everybody full scope representation to get this outcome. So it means they become pro per or self-representative. And there's a clinic that helps in this, and the other legal aids help with pro per. But there's this formula to see like, okay, how many attorneys we need? The better equation is we need to get smarter at the targeted prevention to go upstream and say, how do we don't, you know, we should make sure to have enough attorneys, but we can improve the flow that's coming there. And I think this is done through subsidies and different types of targeted rental assistance and prevention. And more on the Piketty stuff. If we need, you know, we need wealth taxation to fund real prevention. You know, Piketty's core thesis is that sustained public investment requires taxing capital. To fund eviction prevention at scale, we need to tap into the vast wealth gains of the top percent, you know, and And I think for housing in California, that's going at the real estate juggernaut of industry. But and then housing's a battlefield of modern inequality. In the US, owning versus renting is one of the clearest lines of class division. Evictions aren't just personal tragedies, they're the byproduct of a system that rewards hoarding and punishes the poor for being poor. And even more so, evictions themselves is a tool of the government to help ghettoize and displace people. And in these kinds of times, with pressures from the federal government on states and on cities, what ends up happening is we use these tools as society to help create to help build these inequalities and disenfranchise more people. And so I think maybe it'll come up later, but I think it's relevant to talk about what's happening at the federal and state level, more specifically, like HAP funding at the state level, federal cuts to HUD. And I don't know if that'll come up in Hugo and I's conversation, but I'd like to give back, to the group, and we can move this conversation along.
That's great. Thank you, Daniel, and thank you for speaking so clearly about the limits to which some of these programs can change outcomes in our communities, given those larger forces at work. I'm going to pause before we move on to our second and to our third and fourth speakers, and just pose a question to the two of you. Given what I think, Daniel, you've described as a real relationship between eviction defense, tenant right to counsel, and this targeted emergency assistance that Hugo is speaking to, and the connections between both programs in San Francisco and in Oakland in this case, I'm hoping maybe first for you, Hugo, if you could speak a little bit more directly to the connection that you see between the intervention that you've described, this targeted emergency assistance, and this other piece, this other half of the coin, which is eviction defense and legal representation as
Yeah.
being so essential to the success of the other.
Yeah, thank you for that. Let's see, where to begin? So what I'll say is that the incredible work that Daniel's organization, the Eviction Defense Collaborative, or EDC, does is absolutely effective, essential anti-displacement. And I think it's a healthy tension for Daniel and I and all of us to kind of like grapple with. That the slide states that for the legal representation that's provided to folks, and so this is like the gold standard of legal help, right? So it's like your full scope attorney that is litigating this eviction lawsuit on behalf of very vulnerable tenants. So the result of that litigation is that 92% of their clients receive a favorable outcome. So they either stay in their home or they get more money or more time than they otherwise would have received without that legal representation. I don't believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, Daniel, I don't believe that they would have experienced homelessness, right?
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of not overstating the impact. It's just not describing the impact, whereas the impact really is stabilizing very vulnerable households. So it's absolutely worthy in the context of anti-displacement, right? So I would say that if you think of like, and I haven't thought about this visual, and that's why I love David's visuals, but if you consider like concentric circles, right? Like a big circle, anti-displacement, everything in it is oops, I froze. Everything that Daniel's organization does is in that circle. But then there's a smaller circle within anti-displacement that's homelessness prevention. And those are really those programs that are targeted to prevent folks from actually entering unhoused homelessness, right? Folks living in their cars, living on the streets. It is true that, and the evidence shows that housing loss from eviction is absolutely catastrophic for those households, has lasting detrimental effects on their health, on their finances, on everything. And it also increases homelessness risk. So I'll put that out there. But it does not necessarily result in those folks experiencing homelessness. So they're not entering the homelessness response system or the streets like David, So let's like, I think there's this counterproductive kind of debate, or this like false dichotomy of, eviction prevention is not homelessness prevention. I would say that not all of eviction prevention is homelessness prevention, but a subset is. So Daniel can absolutely attest to, in San Francisco, tenants in permanent supportive housing being evicted by city subsidized housing providers. And believe me, it's a complex issue. It's not to vilify anyone, right? But in San Francisco, about, if I'm not mistaken, Daniel, it's like 20-25% of all evictions are have as a basis for the eviction so-called nuisance. That's a legal term, right? Like behavioral stuff.
Yeah.
So as Daniel says, like, those folks meet all of the characteristics that David and I described earlier. These are folks who have experienced homelessness. Otherwise, they wouldn't be in PSH, right? They're folks that have other risk factors. And I'm a community development practitioner, so I don't like thinking in terms of risk factors. But again, I'm, it's asset-based. I want to be asset-based. But housing precarity is about risk factors and an absence of protective factors, right? So, but to Daniel's point, it's about like, what can we do more upstream? So what practices can PSH providers implement to prevent kind of that pipeline of PSH tenants into like eviction court, right? And that's where mediation comes in. It's where other legal services that are not necessarily eviction defense come in. It's where rental assistance comes in, right? So that's why I kind of want to distinguish between like interventions that we know work and like the targeting and the actual reduction of inflow.
Yeah.
I don't even know if that answered your question, Susanna, but just wanted to put that out there because again, like they're both, I have many babies. Again, I've been doing this a long time. Eviction defense is my baby. Targeted rental assistance programs are my babies. Ongoing subsidies are my shallow subsidies, like they're all my babies. They're all really effective interventions, but not all of them are designed to prevent homelessness. And I just want to make that distinction so that we're calling a spade, right? If we're talking about anti-displacement, let's talk about anti-displacement. If we're talking about a more vulnerable subset of folks within that space, homelessness prevention, then let's call it that.
Great. Daniel, thoughts from you before we move on?
I mean, I love getting to hear Hugo speak. It's funny that I was going to put him on the spot and talk about, there's so much, like he spoke about the policy in the system. So, I mean, just because I want to address it because he was bringing it up, like there are so
Daniel, I thought this was going to be a beard competition.
Oh,
that's what. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We're going to have people rate us in the end there.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, in terms of the PSH issue and the policy and what we see, there's so many opportunities to tweak policies. Like the city both funds our side, the attorneys here, and funds the attorneys on the PSH side. And if there are policies that made us talk, we would be able to both mitigate costs for the city, but also help to figure out problems in the system. And then also a lot of times the problems that are leading to evictions are things that are addressable in a more upstream way in terms of social work and those things. So we could go on about all sorts of policy things. I imagine there are other panelists and things. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for those quick thoughts. Let's move on to Luke. Luke, I'll hand you the mic.
Beautiful. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Luke Barnesmore. I'm the Managing Director of Strategy with Front Porch Communities and Services. Quickly on Front Porch, we're a 50-plus year nonprofit that provides housing and services for older people. We have some market rate retirement communities, affordable housing communities, but the work I do is with our Community Services Division, where we run a number of programs, including our shared housing program. Home Match, we connect older folks who have an extra room in their home or apartment with folks in the community that are looking for more affordable options. And I think under Hugo's lovely framework there, we are doing anti-displacement work that includes a subset of people who are at risk of homelessness. But today I want to talk a little bit about the work we've been doing in Marin County with a number of our partners and where shared housing is connecting with shallow rent subsidies to address the risks of homelessness among older people who are most certainly either at risk of or who have recently become unhoused. Um, Broad system level data, about 50% of the unhoused population in California is over the age of 50, and I believe it's 42% of that became unhoused for the first time after the age of 50. And I think what we're seeing in older adult homelessness, based on our conversations with partners across the state, is a growing gap between low fixed incomes and the cost of housing, and a very large shortage of affordable housing options for older people. So in Marin, what we were seeing is that gap is pushing people into becoming unhoused, but they're not typically scoring high enough in our coordinated entry system to access permanent supportive housing or a voucher. They're left in a bracket where rapid rehousing is the primary intervention, but they have a chronic barrier to increasing their income over time. And so we're seeing folks living on a low fixed income who aren't meeting those sustainability standards that Ugo mentioned in his presentation, and in many cases, they were just out of luck. So we've been fortunate enough to be able to partner with Gary. I saw him on the call here and his team at the Department of Homelessness and Coordinated Care to create a couple of new subsidy interventions specifically for older people. From HAP4, we created an early intervention subsidy. So this is folks who have just become unhoused. They are in the inflow, but we can catch them early. We know they're not going to score high enough for PSH or a voucher. We know rapid rehousing isn't going to work because they're not going to be able to demonstrate that they can get to a point where they can sustain their own rent. And so this early intervention subsidy is being used to catch them early on in the process rather than them sitting in coordinated entry and increasing in their acuity until maybe they do qualify for something like permanent supportive housing. The more exciting, in my opinion, intervention is the newest shallow subsidy program. This is a first of its kind in Marin prevention intervention. So we used HAP $5 and we created a subsidy program for older adults that are at imminent risk of becoming unhoused. I think we still have some interesting questions to ask about targeting for older people. There are definitely some unique features to older adult homelessness that maybe we don't see in other target population groups. The example I like to use is if you're a younger person and you have a child under the age of 18, you're deemed to have unique needs and unique risks, and you get a separate family assessment. For older people, it's typically those who don't have any children, adult children who can help with different forms of navigation, who become the most at risk of transitioning from housing instability into becoming unhoused. And we don't really have a unique system for mapping that. Another example I'll give quickly on this targeting question is I know in the Napa senior shallow rent subsidy pilot that's running through BAFA dollars, one thing they're looking at is the death of a cost sharing spouse. But what we find is that group of folks that are solo aging, who have never had a cost sharing spouse and who don't have any children, are actually often the most at risk of becoming unhoused when they face that major medical emergency, when the little cabin that they've been sleeping in gets sold and then they're evicted from that space. When those crisis life events happen that drain the savings and push people over the brink, it's those who don't have a spouse, who don't have adult children, who don't have that family support network, who are most likely to then fall into becoming unhoused. So these shallow subsidy programs, what we're looking at is trying to create more permanent interventions. Unfortunately, we're using HAP funding, and so it's time limited, and we'd like to find some local revenue like San Francisco did to create those more permanent shallow subsidy programs, because the reality for a lot of the older folks that we're working with is their low fixed income is not going to increase over time. And so a time limited subsidy really isn't going to get us there. We need that permanent subsidy, but many of them do have at least a little bit of Social Security. So we don't necessarily need the entire housing choice voucher that's going to cover all of the rent. We just need that shallow subsidy of about $1,000 a month. And then I'll just plug in the shared housing program. I think one of our big concerns in Marin was that that $1,000 a month wouldn't be enough to get someone into the lowest rung of market rate housing, given the shortage of affordable housing options. And the shared housing program, by working with older people, average income is about $35,000, $40,000 a year, depending on the county for our home providers. So this is older people who are living on that low fixed income, but who can benefit from the companionship and increased income by opening that extra room in their home to someone looking for affordable housing. I know that the first placement for our shallow subsidy intervention program just happened, and it was through a bedroom that was made available by our shared housing program in Marin. So the shared housing side, while not, I think, again, in Ugo's definition, being just homelessness prevention, it is a broader strategy that includes anti-displacement, that includes homelessness prevention, that includes aging in place, but it's generating those affordable units that really let our shallow subsidies do the work they were intended to do. And that's the story I wanted to tell today. So I'm going to leave it there and open it up for whatever the next stage of this process is.
Thanks, Luke. Thanks for laying out some of those specific vulnerabilities that exist for older adults and how your programs are designed to address them in really creative ways. Let's move to Lisette to talk about a range of guaranteed income programs that work in Santa Clara County with some really interesting impacts. Lisette, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Lisette Martinez, and I am the Initiatives Officer at Destination Home. So quick overview, Destination Home is a public-private partnership ending homelessness in Santa Clara County. I help oversee all of our direct financial assistance work, and that includes some of the guaranteed income pilots that we help support. So we believe that guaranteed income is a vital part of our strategy to combat housing and financial instability. We think it's a transformative solution to ensure long-term well-being of our most vulnerable community members. And as we all know, many families run the risk of losing their housing, and so guaranteed income really bridges the gap, offering financial stability for people to meet their basic needs and secure long-term housing. People are the experts of their own lives and know how to meet their own needs, so we believe that the best solutions are those that empower families in their efforts and decisions to achieve stability. And if you can, next slide, please. So currently in Santa Clara County, there is a total of 9 pilots with 800 plus participants. $25 million have been committed and 7.6 million have been distributed to participants in county. So under this framework, individuals and families receive regular unconditional payments to help promote financial security. The payments can range from anywhere from $500 to $1,200 a month, and it helps individuals meet basic needs like food, transportation, housing, paying their bills, childcare cost, and some have even reported being able to achieve higher education due to the guaranteed income. Next slide, please. So Destination Home currently supports 3 out of the 9 pilots in Santa Clara County. The first one is the Silicon Valley Guaranteed Income Project, which has been running for 3 years now. There is 150 homes, homeless families in Santa Clara County with children. We give them $1,000 a month for 24 months, and we partner with different organizations. So we partner with the Si Se Puede Collective, UCSF, Benioff Homeless and Housing Initiative, who's conducting the study and the data for this GI. And also Sacred Heart Community Service, which is a direct service provider. And we work with Santa Clara County Office of Supportive Housing for their coordinated entry system. So for this particular pilot, we are using privately funded dollars, but we're working with the county. And then for aging with dignity, this is our newest pilot that's in the works. Hopefully this will begin sometime in August. And this is 50 seniors 65 and older who are ineligible for any public benefits. They are going to receive $1,000 a month for 24 months. And our re-entry GI is 100 participants recently incarcerated and released into homelessness. They are receiving $1,200 a month for 24 months, and some people are already exiting this pilot as we speak. And next slide, please. So a lot of the data is still under works and takes some time, but SVGIP has been our longest pilot and has been underway since 2022. And so these are some of the successes reported so far. So many used, GI for paying off bills, debt, obtaining work permits, purchasing a car. They were able to support long-term plans for self-sufficiency, financial stability, and like I mentioned before, many pursued higher education and were able to take on extra classes. Many noted that the lack of affordable, high-quality childcare was a barrier, and so they were able, with the guaranteed income payments, they were able to achieve this. I think that's all I have as far as the overview of the guaranteed income pilots. But yeah, if there's any questions.
Great. Thank you both. What is so interesting, I think, about both Home Match's work and the guaranteed income programs is that they're both designed to be addressing specific vulnerabilities for certain subpopulations that, as we know from David's work and our conversation thus far, that folks who are particularly vulnerable to homelessness. And it speaks to some of this, I think, matching of services to vulnerabilities and services to risks. Luke, I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about how you see your program and others like it getting to that matching of services to risks, maybe to get us started.
Yeah, so I mean, I think I talked about this a little bit in terms of some of the prominent risk factors for older people. I think maybe what we're facing here is not a situation where the risk factors aren't being appropriately measured, but that we don't have enough resources in the bucket of the kinds of interventions that serve people who are lower on that risk pole, but who have a permanent barrier to housing stability. So I think what shallow subsidies are doing are not necessarily addressing the way that the vulnerability is being mapped, but the kinds of interventions that we have for folks on different rungs of that ladder, particularly those who are going to find their way up the ladder. Without the long-term rent subsidy, a lot of the older folks that we work with who are on a low fixed income, they're not going to make it out of the system with rapid rehousing. And so they're going to sit in the system. Lots of expensive resources are going to be spent on shelters and emergency room visits and all of those other systemic interventions that end up happening when someone is left unhoused. And then maybe at some point they get far enough up the ladder, if they survive that long, that they will be able to access something like a permanent supportive housing. So I'm not necessarily the expert in targeting. I think the folks at the California Policy Lab and the way that they've been able to leverage systemic data from a lot of different points is probably the most promising thing I've seen on that front. But what I can say with surety is that the HUD structure that has come down to us with rapid rehousing as that primary intervention for folks who are lower on the rung is probably not going to be the appropriate structure for what we're seeing as the future of homelessness in this country, where we do have the most unhoused older folks since the Great Depression, and rapidly growing numbers in that sector where there are different needs. And it's hard, I know, for us to respond to the changes in the system when we're so dependent on those federal funds, but that just, I think, gives us more impetus for the local revenue generating measures like San Francisco's Prop C that give us those dollars where we can do something a little more dynamic and respond to change.
Well said. Lizette, anything you'd want to add to this before we bring up the rest of our speakers for a couple more questions?
Yeah, just that in the design and implementation of all of these GI pilots, we have taken into consideration, and there's many people sitting on like the advisory board that have direct lived experience. So we do make sure that all of our local partners are direct service providers and are offering a variety of services to all of the people who are in these pilots. So for example, they can get free legal advice. There's federal benefit counseling because, as we know, sometimes we're trying to so guaranteed income should not be considered as any form of income, but sometimes it does affect other public benefits. And so we're working on like different bills and waivers to address this. But we do have free benefits counseling, HPS, homelessness prevention system. So we're working with the Office of Supportive Housing and just making sure that other people, that participants' needs are being met in other areas of their life as well.
That's great. Okay, thank you both. Let's turn to maybe one or two questions for the group before we open things up to our audience. If we could, there you are. Fantastic. Just a couple of questions for all of you, thinking about the full continuum of programs represented here. Something we have spoken a little bit about, but I think might be worth digging into a bit more is how we coordinate a scope of services for folks with different vulnerabilities, different household circumstances. In some cases, many of these programs might live under the one roof of a single organization, but in other cases, they're operating across the system. And I'd love to hear thoughts from this group about how we ensure that services coordination is happening, that all of these individual interventions are being provided in a way that is addressing a host of risks for households being served. Anyone want to jump in with thoughts on that question?
Very carefully.
Say more.
Good
We
answer.
don't
Good
know.
answer.
Oh, I mean, wait, I don't know, you know, centralization is so challenging, but it ultimately is neat. I mean, I, I think that if in this room here, like we all know the interventions that work and what should be happening. And the obstacle is that coordination and centralization. And then so much of it is divisive around funding. And so really the big opportunities that are there, I mean, the divisiveness, I think, happens more on the philanthropic side in terms of winners and losers and people that become Cinderella organizations and get to like spearhead really big initiatives and have really big bets and can afford to do that. And then similarly, there are like city or state or federally funded Cinderella organizations that can do that as well. I don't think there's a lot of will there and on all sides for people to come together and centralize and figure out how to improve in those systems. And we see it, but I think that, and this is where it's cool. Awesome having Hugo here. I think San Francisco's had this opportunity to do that. I think LA County similarly has opportunities to do this in ways that is really exciting in the moment. But it does involve there being this centralization, a cohesive effort, both from the philanthropic and government funding. But that's my initial thought.
I'll quickly share, and Lizette is here representing Destination Home and Santa Clara County, which really is a trailblazer in a prevention system, an actual system. So like beyond coordination among providers. And I will include in the chat when I find it, although I see Jonathan is here with H&H, which is Alameda County's homelessness agency, a brilliant leader there. That Alameda County released a prevention framework that describes that really envisions a system. And it includes, to our credit in Alameda County, a protective policy environment, right? Which isn't just services. There's actually a policy dimension too, in terms of providing kind of the protective kind of factors in housing policy. Right. So tenant protection policies are really important. Legal services so that folks are aware of their rights and through agencies like Daniel's are able to assert their rights, right? Because so many tenant protection laws have to be affirmatively asserted. But then it also describes the alignment of existing programs and systems upstream and downstream, right? So the reentry kind of agency at the county, the social welfare agency at the county, the workforce development, and identifying, again, it's back to the targeting, is identifying those households who are most likely to lose their housing. And if we have a means to identify those households system-wide, or even a network of system-wide, because even those things are their own systems, right? That we would have a means to identify those households and connect them to the help that's available and prioritize them in the availability of this help, right? So I'll include a link to that framework. If I find it, I'll quickly Google it. But it's really brilliant how it kind of lays that all out. And I absolutely agree with you, Daniel, that San Francisco is the only consolidated city and county in all of the state of California. and it's relatively well resourced as compared to other counties. It's small, it's geographically the same, the city and the county, and it has robust investment in civil legal services, robust investment in financial assistance, and robust, county agencies, reentry, homelessness, public health, etc. So it really has like the resources, the pieces there to really replicate kind of a system that Santa Clara has kind of built, but even more robustly resourced. So yeah, I'll share that framework.
That's great. We've got maybe time for one more question before we open things up to the audience. And it's been mentioned earlier, Daniel, you mentioned the federal environment that we're in. Luke, you spoke about how, given some of the constraints in the existing system, how local funding measures are becoming increasingly more important to resource this full continuum. I'd love to hear other thoughts from the group before we turn to the audience about the moment we're in, from the federal threats we face to state and local budget deficits. What sort of opportunities are you seeing at this moment in time to resource, coordinate, and deliver the suite of programs we know are essential?
Got a quick one, and this I think speaks to the first question as well. In Marin, we've made a lot of progress as Gary and his team have really leaned into the service providers who are working with older people, who know the folks that we have been able to serve and also know the unique circumstances of the folks that we haven't been able to serve. And then have really reflected the feedback in these new subsidy interventions that have been able to come out of HCC. So that strong listening on behalf of the county and really working hand in hand with the community partners is a great way to pivot into addressing some of these new frontiers of problem.
That's great. Any final thoughts?
Just really quickly, I'll share. I know I highlighted San Francisco because I saw Daniel, but in Alameda County, we have our own Prop C, like San Francisco has Prop C. We have Measure W, and Measure W also is first of its kind resource that will hopefully overhaul our homelessness response system, our prevention system, and so that really is an opportunity to ensure that the Board of Supervisors in Alameda County really allocates all available funding for Measure W for homelessness response. And then, H&H and other key agencies will be able to build this prevention system for which, the City of Oakland, BACS, All Home, and other partners have really been pioneering for several years now. So I'm really excited about that in Alameda County as well.
My short comment on is that we're going to be forced to. I think it's so dire, some of the cuts like the HUD things, that these interventions work. And I think that it is going to force state and local people to have to do more of this because that's all that there is going to be. Like it's there where that's the advantage of the moment.
Right on. Well said. Okay. I think with that, I'm going to thank you, each of you, for being here today. And I'm going to pass it to Ken to facilitate some questions and discussion from the rest of us, the audience.
All right. Thank you. Maybe we can go to the full screen of everybody. Yeah, if you have a question, raise your hand. I see Jonathan's already in the queue. Jonathan, go for it.
Thanks, Ken, and thanks to the panel. It was a really stimulating discussion that I feel like covered so much of this ground. I have kind of, I don't want to say it's a weedsy question, but more of like a prodding for us system folks as we get into this work of targeting. As a fellow targeter, I wonder if there's a way to kind of surface some potential future problems that we see in the coordinated entry context, because it's a similar, right, motif. We're now 5 years in or so to 7 years into things like coordinated entry, and some of the problem we could maybe call this queuing problem, right? Where we definitely want to prioritize the folks that are most vulnerable. So we need to make sure everyone's assessed, and then we sort of get people in line for services, right? So the highest needs folks are often waiting for that PSH or what have you, right? Which kind of contributes to the problem in some ways. I worry in some ways that a targeted prevention with a short on resources system the very same way, right? All right, we want to target folks that are most need, and we've got limited resources to do so. In principle, makes all the sense in the world. And then we go about targeting in a way that often creates a queuing problem for that family. Where if we're targeting right, it's generally picking out right, meaning that we're picking out the highest needs folks. It's tomorrow, or it's Monday, or it's the groceries they needed yesterday, like that financial intervention is needed so quickly. So I'm curious, just Ugo, if you all are thinking about that, obviously, admittedly, having helped create the Alameda County and other systems, like a perpetrator here, I don't know, perpetrator, but like, how do we fix that? Because ironically, or not, in some ways on the eviction defense side, that's some of the pressure, right? Like, we need to take this family in court now. We don't have time to screen them. We need to serve them, right? So I worry in some ways that there's this paradox in our targeting on the prevention side, that how do we be super targeted and be able to respond tomorrow when that family hits our radar?
Was that a question for me, Jonathan?
It was a statement for you, Ugo.
Okay, yeah, because I'm like, you should
Well, it's
answer
like,
that.
like wrestling with that, I think, is
Yeah.
a system, because in the same way, I think we can, well, I'll put one more piece to it with the sort of eviction protection and prevention. I love your framing of prevention as a function of targeting, not some program over there. So is there a way that we can just like get all the sources in one place, help the folks, whether they're coming into the eviction door or the prevention door or being passed between the two, and then kind of make that a back office function in some ways of whether we're using the prevention dollars or not, right? Because there may be someone that gets eviction defense that needs it today. And if we've got two buckets, we can sort of screen for whether they fall into that prioritization criteria in vivo or after the fact, and then kind of allocate and charge things differently. That doesn't fix the resource problem, but it's a tough one to say. If we're targeting the right folks, they need to be served today, and targeting takes time. That usually means folks aren't getting served for a couple of weeks. Like that problem, do you have thoughts
Yeah.
on it?
Well, I would certainly encourage folks to reflect on that, because I think many of us, to your point, are systems thinkers, systems operators, and your question is very much about operationalizing prevention and targeting, and we should absolutely consider that. And so it's a very complex question. So let's sit with it. And I know that in LA, in Los Angeles, they have an, I'm not a big fan of AI, or at least I don't know if I'm a big fan of AI yet, but they have an AI powered means of targeting folks. So in LA County, they have a means to integrate massive administrative data systems from massive LA agencies that then apply those same or very similar risk factors to identifying folks that are not even applying for help, not even applying for rental assistance or legal assistance, whatever it might be. And so these agencies are leveraging their massive administrative data to identify those folks that research shows are most likely to lose their housing. And then these programs then proactively reach out to folks and connect them to help before that precipitating event, that shock happens, right? So that might be the future. That's operationalizing a prevention system in a way that we've never done in our region. So I'll just put that out there in terms of especially for public agency leaders here that control those administrative systems that could potentially be leveraged for that. But yeah, that's a very important question that you raised, Jonathan, that will require our collective kind of thought and action.
All right, we have another question.
Hi, Sherilyn. Couldn't find the little raise your hand thing.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hi. It's only been 5 years, right? On Zoom. Haven't learned. I don't know. I have thoughts, I'm sure. But I went away.
No, you're there.
Oh,
You're
wow.
still here,
Good.
Sherilyn.
Oh, that's good.
We see you.
Oh, that's great. I like to be seen. I was thinking a little bit about I think this is how do we continue to go upstream around prevention? So I think the conversation that was just happening with Ugo and Jonathan is really still, or about like the targeted prevention or where and how do we get it to the highest need is still a little bit more downstream if we also want to think about sort of how we prevent and how we have services or delivery systems for our services are system wide to prevent folks from even getting to that place, and what's the role as we think about either the homelessness response system or the prevention systems to going more upstream, right? So I loved David's slide that actually highlighted that it's both folks over 60 and folks under the age of 25 that are at I don't love that that's happening, but that we're delineating by sort of population. And some of the comments that Luke made about where seniors fall through the cracks is same things that we see for young people, right? Because they're not seen as a part of the folks needing homelessness prevention assistance or rental assistance, or they're not seen as the reasons why they might be falling into homelessness or where they are right before that, or even a little bit before that. We're not good at assessing so that we can prevent. Canada and Australia are. So I think we need to start, I guess I would just encourage as we think about prevention strategies is to continue this population specific look at what puts people at risk. And then the idea of what is the solution for that particular kind of risk, right? So that we could, because we try to just do all for all. We're like, this is a great solution. We'll just apply it to everyone. But it's not a great solution for everyone, right? So I think we just want to continue to push ourselves to really match the solution to the problem or the potential problem. And that really requires understanding from at a subpopulation level, what is going to drive folks potentially into homelessness, or where the upstream approach, whether it's basic guaranteed or guaranteed incomes or cash transfers, or whether it's what we call problem solving, or whether it's connecting with folks earlier in their who are at high risk and younger. So I don't know if any of that made sense. That's sort of my thought process right now.
Thank you, Sherilyn. Upstream prevention, super important. Any quick responses from any of the panelists?
I mean, I think, young people aren't leaseholders, right? And so then that's like the symptom of society, like people being able to get those kinds of formal things. So then you don't even see them in that system because they're not there. So I think there are more like how do we have a more inclusive society where young people have access to more legitimate types of housing, period. And so, I mean, that's my initial thought on some of it as it relates to our work. We see it like we don't see young people because they don't have leases.
Yeah, I think there's both. They're at risk, right? Because they're off lease,
Yeah.
like you're saying, Daniel, or they're living in, yeah.
Sherilyn, I so happy to see you and hear you, by the way. I will also add, from like a resource allocation perspective, that's a really important tension, right? For a city funder, a county funder, a philanthropic funder, where the crisis level of homelessness is such that funders are most interested in investing in those solutions that can, like with more certainty, affect inflow into homelessness, right? So like nobody will deny that investment is required up and downstream, right? But in such a resource constrained environment where homelessness is just at an unprecedented level, I think that's where this targeted homelessness prevention is like so desired by funders, because like there's a very compelling link to the intervention, the targeting, and the outcome of reducing inflow. Whereas other prevention investments are, again, like they're effective. They absolutely stabilize the housing situations of those whom they serve. And again, like losing your housing through eviction, while you might not experience homelessness, it does, in the aggregate, increase risk, homelessness risk, right? So there's data to support it, but like how tight is that connection?
I would love to offer just quickly sort of it's not really a counterpoint to go, but it's a different lens. And I certainly hope that you're right, that philanthropy will focus on prevention. I know certainly Destination Home does a phenomenal job um, raising those private funds to be able to do this. But what I see more from a local government perspective, and I'll use San Jose as an example because they just approved this in their budget yesterday. They're loath to invest in any significant way in homelessness prevention because it's a problem that exists only in theory. And there is so much focus on, I'm going to call it camouflaging the challenge today by building and overbuilding temporary shelters, which of course don't address prevention and don't address permanent housing, but it's the immediate solution. And for many electeds, of course I am one of them and hoping to distinguish myself, the interest is in what can we do immediately today to show our residents that we are solving this problem. And prevention doesn't have that sexiness of a quick visible appeal in the way that many think the shelters do. So if anybody has thoughts, I feel like it's often an upstream battle that I'm fighting. Thoughts in different municipalities where cities are investing significantly in prevention and able to convey that to their constituents in a way that builds support. I would be really interested to hear that or any other reflections. Thank you. Thanks to all of the speakers. This has been really, really fascinating.
Thank you, Supervisor. You put a really good lens around the whole issue. It's been a great discussion. I know we could go on a lot longer. We're actually slightly past time. But Sherilyn, why don't you jump in, and then I'm going to turn it back to Susanna Parsons. There's a lot, as you all know, going on at the state and federal level right now, and we just want to call attention to that for a moment. So Sherilyn?
Thanks. I just first want to say thanks to Susan, Supervisor, for wow, yes, that was great. 100%. That's how we disinvest also in youth and families, because we focus on who we see. And that causes just is going to cause more and more homelessness to happen. I just a little bit wanted to offer to Hugo. I think we are San Francisco, with the support of All Home, our partner in this, is developing a homelessness prevention system to really address how can we prevent youth homelessness. And I think it will then highlight some of the goal there is to look at effective interventions and strategies like direct cash transfer for young people, but also, again, to have more evidence base to support and strategies to be able to prove or show more effectively or do the work on identifying what the prevention strategy should look like. Because I feel like what happens is people are like, we don't know what to do. There's no identification or agreement about what it should be, and then we don't fund it. And so we're working hard with All Home and city departments and others in San Francisco to really develop a system to prevent youth homelessness.
Thank you so much, Sherilyn. Susanna, you want to just give us a quick overview?
Yeah, very briefly, I didn't want to let this group go without elevating a couple of really timely and urgent advocacy items. So appreciate you staying a little longer to hear us out. There are several things moving at the federal level, and we will follow up on this from this meeting with an email that includes both the slides from today, but also some of that information about federal advocacy updates. What I wanted to spend time talking about just for a moment is what is happening at the state level around the budget. Most urgently, the legislature released its Budget Act a few days ago, and it does not include any funding for the HAP program. It includes a restoration of a few state housing programs, but we are in an existential situation with the HAP program this year. We here at All Home have a toolkit. We are urging everyone who will listen to contact the governor, the pro tem, McGuire and Speaker Rivas between now and Friday to advocate that money be put into the budget to support HAP in the next fiscal year. We're not alone. The Big City Mayors Coalition is with us on this, and others. So I urge you, take 5 minutes of your day today, tomorrow, and Friday to make phone calls and send emails. And again, we'll send follow-up information with that, with those phone numbers and those emails and some templates for you to make it as easy as possible. But wanted to provide that really urgent update around the state budget. Good to see some housing programs restored, but HAP has been omitted. Oh, thank you, Supervisor. CSAC has been a great partner on this as well. And that's, I think, my most urgent update. Again, look out for some follow-up resources from us. Thanks, Lindsay. And maybe Ken, I'll pass it back to you to close us out.
Yeah, I'll just say thanks, everyone. Thanks for that great overview, Susanna. Our next meeting is September 10th. We will be in touch. Please take some time for those calls to action. Take care, everybody.